Hello, everybody. Welcome again to the Readings from the Pavilion End podcast. This is Bill Rickier back here with Akshobh Deodadas, and we're here to talk about the Ashes. We originally planned to do this podcast on Sunday evening, Singapore time. It's now, of course, Sunday morning, Singapore time, Saturday evening in Washington. We did that because we thought, well, the first test should be interestingly poised after 3 days. It would be a good place to start discussing this series. But I think, Akshobh, we're not the only people to have our predictions for this first test confounded by reality.
Someone else is very upset. That is the Cricket Australia Revenue Collector. Apparently, they've lost millions. It's damned if you do, damned if you don't. They've been euphoric about the result, but Travis had to almost apologize to the 60,000 that were expected on the day 3 because it was a Sunday. And apparently, I was reading a report that says they lost the revenue in millions for people, from ticket sales and broadcast rights and sponsorship rights, because there is no day 3 or day 4.
Yep.
So extremely, so confounded is very, very apt though.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen a test match quite like it. I'm sure many people would say that. I mean, England batted twice and batted for a total of 75 overs, I think roughly, which is less than a full day's play. I mean, you're not going to win many test matches performing like that.
No, certainly not. And the funny part is I remember those 3-day tests low scoring, but those aren't ranked turners sometimes or very, very green tops. In fact, I remember there's a political commentator in India who actually said something that I don't agree with him on 99% of things, but I agree with him on one thing. He says 17 wickets lost to Eden Gardens, and the commentary is almost like, look at these dust bowl pitches, unsporting wickets. 19 wickets lost on day 1 of the first Ashes test, spell of brilliant bowling, So, we talk about consistency. Well, that's, I remember, no wonder R. Ashwin was once saying who decides what's a friendly pitch and what's not a sporting wicket. No, I was so looking forward to the Ashes, and I think on day 1, even though I was jet lagged aside from a business trip, and given the time difference, I always love watching cricket in Australia, particularly when I'm in the US. When I was in India and Singapore growing up, it was very impressive because then you wake up knowing that you missed a little session, but it was a wonderful day to wake up for, especially during the holidays, and hearing Richie Benaud's mellifluous voice and the seagulls in the corner. I don't see the seagulls anymore. And, the seagulls are a very fond memories. They were scattered away from Adam Gilchrist 4 or Tendulkar 4. And now, what I love about watching the US is I get to watch the first session from the start while the rest of Asia is still sleeping or just waking up. And it reminds me there are warmer times and summer times in the rest of the world while we're freezing cold right now in the winters.
Yeah, well, indeed. Well, here in Singapore, it's a bit different. The time, of course, as you know, Perth is the same time zone as Singapore. So it's very good here. And after the extraordinary, this game is so extraordinary. It seemed to start very badly for England, being bowled out for 175. But at the end of the first day, they seemed to be sort of on top. And in fact, as late as lunch on the second day, you would say they were still on top. They were 95 ahead with 9 wickets left. You think, now, just sit down, bat carefully. You could get a lead of 300, and surely the game is yours. And it's just so, I think, the end result, I think it's no exaggeration to say it's a humiliation for England to go from that position, that to be bowled out in a session, 9 wickets in a session, then Head comes in, and I suppose you could call it Bazball with brains. He wasn't firing on all cylinders from, the first over. He did play himself in. And then he and the others too seem to be chanceless. They seem to be in really no difficulty at all. And you can't help feeling that England, made their own difficulties. That patch of play just after lunch, when they lost 3 wickets for no runs, Pope, Brooke and Root, all of whom playing at balls they could have left. That was a real game changer, I think. And then Stokes was out. Stokes was bowled. Perhaps he wasn't bowled, but I think it was quite a good ball that got Stokes. But the batting, they can't go on like this, surely. Is this their plan? There were rather worrying comments by Stokes, who said at the end of the game that, well, look, everybody got any runs was out there attacking, which was sort of true in that Head, Brook, Cars, they all went for it. But I can't help feeling that Head went for it in a slightly different way. And people will say, I think, and people are saying, that, put it in context, this is one of the great Ashes innings, considering what all the rest of the batsmen did. I mean, Brook, okay, he got 50, but you felt Brook could have been out almost any ball. I mean, he played some wonderful shots, but I mean, that's the way he plays. You didn't feel that with Head. You thought batsmen have struggled so much, and he comes in the fourth innings and gets a match-winning 100 opening, which he doesn't normally do in 5-day cricket. It was really a phenomenal performance.
Oh, absolutely. Josh Butler called it a head ball, and Travis Head has been a thorn in many sides, including India. Of course, you remember the 2023 World Cup final as well as the World Test Championship. So he's called Head 8 with the hyphen, and and I think it's one of those underrated because, and this is a longer piece for another day, the number 5 role in Test, because it's one of those roles where it doesn't get as much importance as the number 3, number 4 in Test or the openers, but the number 5 it's a very peculiar position. You're almost as good as being number 3, number 4, but you're not there yet. And someone like Rishabh Pant there, Ben Stokes occasionally number 5, or Travis Head as well. So it's a very interesting southpaw collection. But where I was going with this is, I think he the bass ballers, like show them what it is. Because the problem I have is that I had that problem in England's first innings as well. Under 33 overs, they got out, 34. Less than an ODI innings, right? I mean, I feel that it was more Shahid Afridi and less Travis Head. And the problem with that is, this is not just blind T20 cricket. You can't, this whole thing of hitting only, going for everything. And I think if England didn't bowl well in their first innings, then the view was still that tapered over some of the cracks in the way England batted, right? Harry Brook got to a 50, but with a very risky 50 with a lot of audacious shots. The thing is, they always say that if you're just going to sit and block, there's going to be a ball with a name on it. But if you're just going to try and go out there and hit 4s and 6s, well, the bowlers are not stupid, let alone a quality opposition attack like Australia, in fact, on their grounds. One of the things that people forget is basic geography, right? And the grounds in Australia are much bigger, the 80-meter boundary, the 85-meter boundary. Even if you get one up there, in Headingley, and go over the Western Terrace for a 6. But in Perth, you're likely to be caught out at long leg, so you can't really time that, and you can't. And the way Pope and I think Pope and Duckett batted was also fine. They had a setback of Crawley, but they rotated strike. In fact, I remember looking at England's innings, and I'm like, wait, why are you only going for 4s and 6s? There's a way of playing good aggressive cricket. You can go at 4.5 and over. If a ball's in the slot, by all means, go for it. Yeah. But the problem with this is the Sam's constant approach, which works the first time, but then teams are going to figure you out very fast. They also don't think that Test cricket, there are no field restrictions. You can bowl a lot more bouncers, a lot more wide at the wicket. You can set the field differently. I mean, it's not like you're playing to get 100 runs in 10 overs before to win a Test match. You have to go all kamikaze on this. And I just think there's a traditionalist approach in Test also, where you put a price tag on your wicket, right? And you play the situation, which I actually think Duckett and Pope did after Crawley's pair. They're like, oh, play the situation. And this is where we were all asked for Ashes prediction as well. And this is where I kind of said, look, this is England's best chance. Because one is, you got 2 of the 4 quartet out. Pat Cummins, Captain Inspirational. There's actually a comic book, Captain Australia. That's Pat Cummins, right? I mean, he looks the part of Clark Kent. He bowls the part of Glenn McGrath. And he's got the aura as well. Like, he's been the best thing to take over Australian captains in a while, right? And he was out as well. Josh Hazel was out as well. Yeah, of course, Richard started a mug with the ball. He's phenomenal. And of course, Scotty Boland has done a lot of damage as well. But this was still, time that England had the bowling attack to want. They had Archer and Wood steaming at 150k. and they had a superior batting attack that they didn't have in the 2021 series. So if this was the time to stamp the authority and get the result at Perth, and all of a sudden the question mark could be in Australia that is Winter Held good enough, or was Doggett more effective? What do we do here? I mean, Nathan Lyon was virtually uncalled for in this game. We didn't even know he was on it, right?
Yeah, my concern about this game was actually that Lyon has a very good record at this ground. And I thought if England bat, of course, Stokes always likes to chase, but I thought, facing Lyon on this might be difficult. And you're right, there were 3 overs of spin in the whole game, one of them bowled by Root at the end.
Yes. No, it was. So I'm going to come to another thing, though, and I don't know if that's a later question. Someone asked me what it takes to win series in Australia, right? I mean, it's a tough place to win them.
Yeah, I don't know if you looked at my last blog, Akshobh, because I did talk about this. Of course, people say, Ben Stokes will say history is irrelevant. And up to a point, it might be irrelevant. But my feeling was that when you look back at the whole history of the Ashes since 1877, whatever it is, I mean, Australia have won significantly more times than England. It's as simple as that. I think Australia won 40 more tests than England. And that shows you that Australia are usually stronger. And when they're stronger for longer periods of time than England are. Like, England have had occasional periods of dominance, of course, around 2009, 2010, back in the 1980s, in the 1950s, they were strong. But they don't tend to have periods like, the period when Border, Taylor war, that sort of 15, 18 years, whatever it was, when Australia won every series in England and Australia. England are better now, but everybody says Australia haven't won a series in England since 2001, which is true. Yeah. But England haven't won a series in England since 2015. They're very evenly matched in England, but in Australia, as we all know, England have now played 16 successive test matches in Australia without winning a single one. They've drawn 2, and that just shows you where the balance. But for England to win, 2 things have to coincide. They have to be particularly strong, and Australia have to be in a transitional phase or particularly weak. Particularly weak, they're almost never particularly weak, but they can be going through a transitional phase, as they were in 2010-11, when England were extremely strong, Australia were pretty poor in the 1980s when Mike Gatting's side won. I think England were at their best, actually, in 1970-71 under Ray Illingworth, when Australia were not that bad. They were not as strong as they have been, but they weren't bad. And that was a tight series, and England won because they had a superb opening batsman, Jeff Boycott, and a brilliant fast bowler, John Snow, with great support for both of them. That's what you need. So my feeling was Australia are going through a transitional phase. Their top batting looked a bit more shaky with the openers. Labuschagne seemed to be out of form. Now, thanks to Travis, one of the wonderful things that Head did was enable Labuschagne to play himself back into form. And, of course, they've got these great the great bowling attack, but they are aging. You feel they couldn't go on forever. And indeed, as you said, Cummins, their talismanic captain and best fast bowler, and Hazelwood weren't playing. So what better chance could England have than in this Perth Test match? And I think a few things. One is they are proud of the fact they think their preparation is brilliant, even though it doesn't involve playing a single first-class game. I don't see how that could be regarded as sensible preparation. Strauss's team played 3 or 4 first-class games. We all know the calendar makes these things difficult. But I think really going to the nets, and of course going to the gym, I wonder how much time Fred Truman and John Snow and Alec Bedsoe and Ian Botham spent in the gym. No wonder our modern fast bowlers get injured all the time. They spend too much time in the gym, I suspect. The way fast bowlers historically have prepared is by bowling. And you bowl in matches and batting. I'm sure someone like Root, part of the reason he's struggling is he hasn't had any proper practice. I really think that was a mistake. And of course, Brisbane is always going to be a struggle. And I think a day-night game in Australia Well, who knows what can happen, but the odds must be on Australia winning that game, and that puts them 2-0 up. Of course, historically, England have lost the first test and gone on to win the series. The most famous occasion was, of course, 54-55, when Len Hutton put Australia in at Brisbane, and they got 650 and won by an innings. But then Hutton played around with the team. Frank Tyson, Typhoon Tyson came in. Tyson and Statham went through Australia. England won the series 3-1. But then they had again. Now, I think, to be fair, this side, you got Mark Wood, you got the brilliant Archer was so good on their first day. Archer and Wood. England have got that ammunition, but the bowlers can't do it on their own. And for start, if England are all out for 35 overs every time, the bowlers can't rest. So,
I agree, Bill. So let me add one small part about the day-night match as well. And one small part about Mitchell Starc also. Just a small part, given these are the world's best three-ball bowlers. That adds to England's merry list of woes. But what I will say, Bill, to your point as well, I think I noted it well. I would say three things that you need to win a series in Australia. You've outlined those two as well. One is, of course, you have to have a side that's very strong. You have to have an Australian side that's very weak. But the part that people always forget is you have to have a side where you bat well and score runs. And I want to reference two series that happened, right? One, of course, is the 2010-11, the last time England won in Australia. I remember being in Singapore, and it was a fantastic series. But reference that series first. Apart from England being very, very good, we put these three formulas to test, right? Australia in transition, Ricky Ponting was aging out, and Steve Smith was still a leg spinner making a debut. Yeah. So he had not yet announced himself on the world stage. So you already see the chinks in the armor on the batting side. And don't forget, the Australian great quartets were not there. That's the Glenn McGrath, Brett Lee, Shane Warne, Jason Gillespie, and the Cummins, Stark, Hazelwood, Leighton line were not there. So you had the individual brilliance of Mitch Johnson, who was not bowling very well that series. Ergo, the Barmy Army came up with he bowls on the left, he bowls on the right, and Mitchell Johnson is bowling to shine. Ryan Harris, Peterson picked up a hat-trick, but don't forget Bell Nielsen house. But none of these bowlers, with the exception of Johnson, we would call great Australian bowlers. You're not going to think back in history with that, right? So they were struggling. Second part is Alistair Cook. He probably qualified him to Knightford was that series also. He got double tons and well supported by Jonathan Trott and Ian Bell, AP getting runs. They all got massive runs. And don't forget, the first Gabba test was a draw because there were runs and runs and runs and runs. And that's what you kind of need in a lot of ways. And let's put the same formulating test in the 89 India's maiden series win in Australia. There is a very famous saying, right? Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, and then they don't get you Pujara will. Well, I'm going to say ashes to ashes, dust to dust if Kohli doesn't get you Pujara will. Because what I thought that series really happened was Pujara announced himself in the way that no one had seen him. Everyone in India knew he was a great batsman, but since Rahul Dravid, he got codified as a rock, playing the wall role that Dravid did very well. And what he did was suck the venom out of the Australian sting, right? And so everyone was targeting Kohli, but Pujara bats for the ages. If this was a professional football match, well, he'd be the classical defensive midfielder, classic number 6. Everyone focused on Kohli, the attacking midfielder going in, but Pujara absorbs the pressure. He sets up the plays. To the point, I remember there was a report about Australian team meeting and Pujara's name came up on screen. Hazelwood just threw the bottle in disgust saying, this guy never gets out, And it's like watching Pujara. And I think that he was a top scorer, having scored 3 centuries. In fact, India should have won the series 3-1 the last day in Sydney was rained out. And it was brilliant. Now, and Australia was also, I wouldn't say in transition, but Steve Smith and David Warner, two very vital cogs, were in the bat spot fixing. So you see, and no Australian batsman got 100. I don't know, you'd have to ask the statistician, when was the last time there was a summer series in Australia where no Australian batsman got a ton? We've already seen that in the first test match here, Bill, and there was barely 200 scored on either side, right? And you already see one of the 100. So there was a weakness as well. Australia had a good bowling attack, and then India unearthed Jasprit Bumrah in Test cricket. Right, and he was supported by Ishant Sharma, Umesh Yadav, and Mohammad Shami, who had bowled well. So India had everyone talks about a bowling attack, you need 20 wickets, that goes without saying. But people forget the batting is important. Australian wickets are not bad batting wickets. It's just you have to get on top of the pace and bounce.
Yeah.
And traditionally, David Warner and Adam Gilchrist and the opener are showing how to do that, as well as, you can play the waiting game like Steve Smith does. So people in England, you have never had that going for them in Australia. Even the problem is, I think they always focus on the bowlers who can get the wickets of Jordan Andersons, forgetting that you need batsmen to get there.
Yeah.
And we talk about Root being great. Of course, he only scored 100 in Australia, which, well, I don't know if it'll even diminish his legacy. But if England had any chance of winning the series, I can't see it without Root getting among the runs.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree with you entirely.
But one last point I'll say that now you may say, hang on a minute. Okay, you have to have a strong batting side. You got to get a bowling attack that picks 20 wickets. And I said bowling attack, not just pace attack, because you need, like, Australian great attacks have always had a good spinner. Shane Warne, Nathan Land. Ashwin has done very well in Australia as well, as has Kumble. England don't have a world-class spinner, with no disrespect to Shoaib Bashir. But you say, what about the 21 series, when Australia were at its best and Indian players dropped like flies? Well, that's the beauty of sport, Bill. Sometimes it doesn't follow the rules. That's why it was such a great series, because no bookie, no pundit who would have bet on India winning that. That's what they care about with all of that. But I think that's where all the rules sometimes go out of the window, because that's the beauty of sport, right? It just produces miracles. But traditionally, this is what it takes to win in Australia. And I thought that England missed the best shots at Perth.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. Going back to your point about they need good batting, of course, it's absolutely your point. That 2010-2011 series, I was there. I was there for the Adelaide Test. I think it is the favourite Test match I've attended. Australia were 0-2 after 1 over, I think. And Simon Cattish was out to a diamond duck, out without facing a ball, run out without facing a ball. And then England just piled on the runs. Cook got 150, Trott got 100, KP got a double century. It was absolutely marvellous. And even, the Gatting won that series, partly because, Ian Botham bowled well, Gladstone Small bowled well. Chris Broad, who everybody forgets, got 3 centuries in that series. You always need somebody to get the runs. That 70-71 series, Jeff Boycott got a lot of runs, but he's very well supported by John Edrich and Brian Lucas, both of whom got centuries. Now, in the last 2 England visits to Australia, I think the only England batsman who's got 100 in Australia is Johnny Bairstow, because Ben Stokes got one back in 2013-14. But, this series, what's going to happen? Root and Stokes are obviously great players, and Root ought to get 100. I think it will be. We all know he's a great player, but he needs that century in Australia, and I'm sure he knows that too. Stokes has one, and Stokes remains, looking forward to the rest of the series. Because of Stokes, one can't say that this is a certainty for Australia to win, because Stokes is capable of doing extraordinary things, and I think, in fairness, of inspiring his players to do extraordinary things. But there has to be, I think, a slight change of mindset. People, of course, the hype about this series, let's hope the series does live up to it. The fact that a game is over in 2 days is a bit worrying. And everybody says, the beginning is such an exciting indication of what is to come, like the obvious examples like Harmison's wide. The last series, to be fair, which is a great series, the 2023 series in England, Crawley hit that first ball from Cummins for 4, and this sort of sets a sort of tone. This game, well, look at Crawley, he's back to pair, and he got out in ways which everybody knows about Crawley, but can't he just try and stay quiet for a few overs before starting to try and hammer it through the offside? It's just not going to work if he carries on like that.
Yeah, the first ball, everyone says, test matches and a 5-game test or 5 series is, of course, a marathon or a sprint. But the first ball have served as harbingers for what's to come. On many signs, more for England than Australia, given Harmison's wide and a 5-0 rubbing. Don't forget Roddy Bones being castled on his legs with that ball.
Yes.
And that set the tone. It could have been final if Broad and Anderson didn't go Broad and Anderson backing to save the game, And of course, probably hitting the ball for four, and I obviously do wish there was no rain because you absolutely did deserve to win that Old Trafford test. But as you rightly said, it always rains in Manchester. I I feel right, exactly. The problem is even Ferraris will come with a brake, right? Like no matter what the speed. And the thing is, you got to shift gears, right? I understand this is the new basketball era, but basketball era doesn't mean fours or sixes. An aggressive style cricket also means you modulate. You play the situation. You know you're on a pair. The last thing you want is to go off again on a pair, right? You try to hold off a little bit. And I think playing the situation, like Duckett had a good ball that came and stuff on exit, but then all of a sudden, you got a Root at the wicket. You're Joe Root. You're the second best after Tendulkar in terms of runs. You got a zero. You got an off a pair as well. There was no need to edge that. Harry broke as well. Fishing outside off as well. I mean, it was just one after the other, and even Ollie Pope as well. So all of a sudden, that's when England lost the game 3-4-5, and all of a sudden,
yes, exactly. That was a real turning point. Yep.
Then you say Smith could have also been out for North and Usman Khawaja held on. So, I mean, at that point, it's like, what difference does it make? And then, and you can't expect, we expect Atkinson and Costello. They'll swing a little bit, they can hang around, but they can't take you 200, 250 runs that you need to do. And their job is with the ball. So, it behooves on 3-4-5. And I think that's the whole point that I once heard Rahul Dravid once say, don't leave it up to someone else. Dig in for a win. Dig in. And I think the fact that this whole concept of basketball has no other alternatives, then it's ridiculous because, like I said, Ferrari comes with brakes. Just because it speeds, you're going to know where the cliff is. And then no good, Ferrari is no good if it flies off a cliff, right?
Yeah. No, you
going to do that.
You can see what Stokes and McCollum are getting at. There has to be a more positive mindset and people need to enjoy what they're doing. But I think a good comparison is when Steve Waugh became captain of Australia, Hayden and Langer, Australia are often batting at 3.5, 4 runs and over and away, which hadn't happened before. But that was, and that was why one of the reasons they were such a good side. Of course, they had the bowling attack to back it up as well. But that's the sort of, they weren't playing like this. I mean, so much of this is frankly just brainless. And, right at the end of the first innings, when Smith was still there, and Smith is a serious batsman, everybody else was just sort of trying to cart it around all over the place. And as you say, kept being caught out in mid-wicket because these grounds are so much bigger.
Of Stokes' 11 wickets, then how many of those wickets did he actually earn? When Mr. Stokes has been around the block for a while, he's never taken 7 wickets in an innings, which shows you that, look, he's had to work more often than not. He's had to work for his wickets. Sure, there's always that odd tail-enders and like to the 5-4 or whatever, but you've had to work for your wickets. This was not a wicket where in the first inning where Stark was able to extract any swing from it, but he was bowling well. But you put pressure on Boland, I get it, because of the memory of the last series, because Boland, it looks very innocuous when he runs up the board, but he has a annoying knack of picking up wickets.
Yes.
In a very McGrath fashion, like he does that. So I think we'll put him off his rhythm a little bit.
I think also he did poorly in England they seemed to get after him in 2023, so that must have been a factor too. Yeah.
That must have been a factor, but the things change in Australia where he's more familiar with the condition, especially at the G. I think they're going to play him as well. But I just didn't understand that. You have a weekend attack. Brendan Doggett, of course, spoke highly, but didn't really. Well, I don't think caught my eye the same way as the way Cass or Atkinson or any of the English bowlers would. But then Harry Brook gifting him a soft wicket as well. I mean, this was your choice. You had the quartet of seam attacks that you wanted. A fit Wood, a fit Archer, Atkinson.
Well, you have 5. You have 5 fast bowlers.
Yeah, and I thought Stokes would pick up the 5. I had that going for you. Australia without that. I mean, this was your chance. And honestly, the batsman that lost the game for sure. Because when you lose 9 wickets in a session, it just shows you don't know what you're doing, or you just it's not like, I mean, it wasn't even like Craig Braid when Broad took 8, right, in Australia for 6. That was an exceptional swing bowling, right, by Stuart Broad, and the Australians couldn't understand what was happening. But this was not that. This was just reckless batting. And that's when I think, someone like Root and Brook, I really, really have to pick on some of the thing. And if I were Ben Stokes, of course, it's hard to be captain and bowler and all that. But I say, look, the bowling is, I do okay with the ball. I picked up 5 wickets. I got I got an amazing coordinator of seamers. I'm supposed to be the fill-in role a little bit. I focus on the batting if I'm Ben Stokes, right? I mean, of course, Mitchell Stark has got his number. It's kind of becoming a Broad to Warner thing or a McGrath to Atherton thing, a bit of a bunny. But and to be fair, Stokes had good balls in both innings, right?
He did.
Came in,
Yes,
he had the one that left in. So, but at the same time, a Ben Stokes 100 lifts it up because he's got an aura about him.
Indeed.
Right? And I would try to focus. And I think Stokes has been a little short of runs for a while. I think he got a 100 against India or so. But then one Australia, especially from your captain, that really does set the tone, makes a statement. And I think that heading innings from Stokes in 2019 is one of the greatest innings I've ever seen. And I think that's where I'd be Ben Stokes. I'd be focusing more on batting than anything.
I was at Lord's in 2023 when he got actually an equally extraordinary 100. That was after the Bairstow Carey incident. Anyway, I think thank you so much, Akshobh. I think, what do you have a prediction? It's very difficult. These two sides, it's very difficult to predict. But how do you think it's going to go?
Oh, my prediction was more before the first, and that's if England win the first, then we can see it. I know one of my mates predicted too, which I think is very generous. I hope I'm wrong because I'd like to see England do well in Australia because otherwise it just gets very monotonous and one-sided. As of now, it looks like 3-1 Australia.
Yeah, I was thinking exactly the same thing. I'm afraid, this game must have been hugely enjoyable for you as a neutral bystander. For me, I mean, it was fascinating, intriguing, almost unbelievable. But, of course, at the end of the day, it's very disheartening. And even with Stokes and McCullum, I think the psychological impact of this loss is going to be quite daunting. And we know what Brisbane is going to be like. I'm going to Adelaide. And yes, it will be my fourth Ashes test at Adelaide. So far, it's 2-1 so far. We'll have to wait and see.
I've never been to Adelaide. I've done games in Melbourne and Sydney. I love NCG. Takes my breath away. I haven't done it for the Boxing Day test though, but I've done it for World Cup finals. But I will say this: I'm not as much neutral because I do tend to support England in the Ashes. Only because I don't. I don't like to see. There's no fun watching a formal whitewash as well. It wasn't as good because I was hoping to watch more cricket over the weekend, but so that part I was disappointed with. I would say this, right? I mean, I think if England is supposed to get anything out of it, they have to reset, rev up the engines. I like that they came back in 2023 after being 2-0 down. But of course, conditions were in England. They almost this was Harakiri throwing it away. It'll be very interesting to see what England do, especially ominous signs in Brisbane. But I'm very surprised that Australia moved the ping ball venue away from Adelaide. I think every test venue was starting to get a little famous. Everyone knows about the Boxing Day test or the pink test in Sydney. So the Adelaide would have been a ping ball test having a special charm to it. And now the West test. Of course, they also changed it from the first test from Yaba to Perth now.
Yes.
But in fact, I was actually thinking about the similarities of last year in India. India used a wildcard to prepare, and India started off well after the 3-0 defeat. And when the pitch started slowing down, I thought, okay, Duckett could do a Jaiswal here,
yes. The first days were so similar.
Yes, it was like 1 wicket down, Duckett and Pope around the runs, and have Root and Brook come and add a few more and, make 340, 350, you need 400, put them in and let them do the dance, but instead, lo and behold. And even then, you would just think, okay, fine, 200, is it competitive if this will be England bowled ball? Travis had said, hold that thought for a minute. You have to be a Piers Morgan optimist to see England winning this Ashes.
I'm afraid so.
Stranger things happened. And I'm looking forward to a good series.
Absolutely. It's going to be fascinating, whatever happens. But
I think it's not getting 100 Australia is the same way people talk about, Lionel Messi hadn't won the World Cup before he won the World Cup. It's not one thing that people always miss. So Tendulkar before 2011, both cases. Then Messi won the World Cup, Tendulkar won a World Cup as well. So let's see if Root gets that 100. It's the final summit they need to conquer at the peak. So that's what they
do that. There was the Guardian newspaper picked their top 100 Ashes players, which is really interesting. I think it's free. You should be able to get it online. Number one, it was Shane Warne. Number two was Bradman. I agree with that. I think it was a sensible decision. Root was in the top 40 or so. I still think, in a way, he was too high. He was ahead of Dennis Compton. I disagree with that. I think Compton's record in Australia, although he had one shockingly bad series, he got 200s in the test against Adelaide, and he played amazing innings against Bradman's Invincibles. I think it's quite wrong that Root was placed ahead of Compton. But if Root can help win this series, then everything would change.
Yeah, it's called the Compton Miller Player Award.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. Anyway, I think we should probably... Thank you so much. We'll reconvene later in the series to hopefully celebrate something.
Yeah, hopefully to Adelaide wins as well.
Yeah, indeed.
So looking forward to it, yes.
Okay. Thanks very much, Akshobh. And good evening to you.
Thank you, Bill. Have a very good rest of your Sunday.
Thank you very much. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Please subscribe, and you can do that by looking at the website where you found this. Recommend to your friends, and I'm more than happy to take requests. Thank you.